Some things you can explain if you sit with them long enough. A dog that runs off and comes home muddy, that's just a dog. A dog that comes home with a wet $20 bill tucked under its collar and does it again the next week, and the week after that, until an old man who hadn't smiled since his wife's funeral is standing in his yard shaking, holding money he swears to God he never earned. That's not a dog anymore. That's a question. And the thing about questions like that is they don't let you sleep. I know because I followed that dog into the woods, and what I found at the end of the trail wasn't treasure. It was worse. It was a person, and she'd been counting on nobody ever finding her. The first time I saw Holly's Vane cry, he was on his knees in the frost, and he was laughing while he did it, which is a sound I've never heard before or since, and hope I never do again. It was maybe 6 in the morning, the kind of cold that gets into the fillings of your teeth. I'd come over because his fence line runs against my north pasture, and one of his posts had gone soft and let two of his heifers wander onto my grass, and I'll be honest with you, I came over annoyed. I'd rehearsed a whole speech about it in the truck. Hollies, I'd say, a man your age has got no business letting his fences go. And if you can't keep them up, you ought to say so and I'll help. But I can't be chasing your cows at 5 in the morning. I never said any of it, because when I pulled into his yard, he was down in the dirt in his long johns with no coat on in 20-degree weather, and his dog was standing over him, and Hollies had both hands cupped like he was holding water, except it wasn't water. It was money. Bills. Wet, folded, some of them coming apart at the creases, and he was counting them with fingers that wouldn't stay still, and he was laughing, and the tears were just running straight down into his beard and freezing there. "Wade," he said when he saw my truck. He didn't get up. "Wade, look at this." I got out. My name's Wade Coffee, by the way, though everybody up this valley just calls me Coffee on account of there's 3 Wades within a 10-mile stretch, and I'm the least interesting one. I run 160 head on land my grandfather cleared, and I keep a ledger, a real one paper, the kind you have to add up yourself, because my daddy taught me that a man who doesn't know his own numbers is a man waiting to be robbed. I mention the ledger because it matters later. I write things down. It's a habit that saved me money and cost me sleep, and by the end of this it did both. I crouched down next to him. The dog, his name was Rye, a big rangy shepherd mixed the color of a wet paper bag. Rye stood there panting, tongue out, mud up to his chest, burrs matted into the fur of his hindquarters like he'd come through the thickest part of the tree line. There were leaves stuck to him, pine needles, and under his collar, half slipped out, was the corner of another folded bill. "How much you got there?" I said. "I don't know." He was still laughing that terrible laugh. "I keep losing count. My hands, look at my hands, Wade, I can't." He stopped, swallowed, started again. He came back like this 3 days ago. First time I thought I dropped it, that it was mine and I'd forgot. $10. I told myself I forgot. But I don't forget money, Wade. You know I don't forget money. That was true. Holly's Vane was the tightest man in the county, and I mean that with love. He'd reuse a tea bag 4 times. He kept every screw he ever pulled out of anything in coffee cans labeled by size. A man like that does not forget $10. And then 2 days later, he said 20, and I stopped telling myself things. And this morning he held up the cupped hands. His breath came out in clouds. This morning he's gone before light. I hear him barking away off past the creek, and he comes back like this. "Wade, I counted 80 before I lost it. There might be 100, there might be more. I want to tell you what $100 is to a man like Holly's, because if you didn't grow up somewhere quiet you might not understand it, and then none of the rest of this will land right." Holly's Vane was 71 years old. His wife Maren had died 14 months before this, in the spring, of the kind of cancer that takes a person slow enough that everybody has time to say goodbye and fast enough that nobody's ready anyway. They'd been married 51 years. They never had children that lived. I knew there'd been one, a daughter, but I didn't know the story, and you didn't ask Hollies about it, the same way you don't ask a man about the empty sleeve where his arm used to be. After Maren went, Holly stopped keeping his place up, not all at once. It was like watching a field go back to weeds, the garden first, then the paint, then the fences, which is how I ended up in his yard that morning. The medical bills had eaten everything. He'd mortgaged the back 40 to pay for a treatment that didn't work, and then he'd had to sell the timber off it to keep the bank quiet. And I knew, everybody up the valley knew, that Holly's was maybe one bad winter from losing the place his own father had died on. So $100 coming out of the woods, tucked under a dog's collar, with no explanation on God's earth for where it came from, that wasn't money. That was a lifeline thrown by a hand you couldn't see, and I watched Holly's grab it. I watched him hold onto it like a drowning man, and I felt something turn over in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet. "You need to come inside," I said. "You're gonna freeze to death out here, and then it won't matter how much money the dog brought you." He let me help him up. He was lighter than he should have been. I could feel his shoulder blades through his shirt, sharp as tent poles, and I thought, when's the last time this man ate a real meal? And I added it to the list of things I was going to have to figure out. Inside, his kitchen was cold and clean in the way of a house where one person lives who used to be two. Everything in its place because there's nobody to move it. Marin's apron still hung on the hook by the stove. Her reading glasses were still folded on the windowsill over the sink, and I'd have bet my truck that Holly's hadn't touched them, that he walked past them 100 times a day and left them exactly where her hands had set them down. He spread the money out on the kitchen table and we counted it together. I counted it twice because my hands were steadier than his. $130. Ones, fives, tens, two 20s. Some of it old, really old, the small head bills they stopped printing decades back. Some of it new enough to be crisp under the mud. That bothered me, the mix. Money that's been sitting in a jar for 40 years, and money that came out of an ATM last week, all in the same handful. "Holly's," I said, "where's a dog get money?" I know how it sounds. I'm not saying you're lying. I counted it, it's real, it's in my hands. I'm asking, where does a dog get money? He sat down. He looked at Rye, who'd flopped by the wood stove and was licking mud off his paws like the most ordinary dog in the world. "There's somebody up there," Holly said quietly. "That's the only thing it can be. Somebody up in the tree lines giving it to him. Somebody who," he stopped. His jaw worked. "Somebody who knows me, who knows who knows how it is with me, and won't come down and say so." "Charity," I said. "Don't call it that." Sharp, sudden, the old proud man snapping through. "I don't take charity. I never took a dime off anybody in my life." "I know you don't." Marin wouldn't, and there it was, that catch, that stumble every widower has where the sentence just stops because the person it was headed toward isn't there to finish it. He put his hand over his mouth, got himself back. "If somebody's leaving it," he said, "they're not leaving it for charity. They're leaving it because they want it found and they don't want to be seen. That's a different thing." I didn't understand the difference then. I do now. But that morning I just wrote it down in my head, the way I write down fence posts and feed prices, because it was a number that didn't add up, and unadded numbers are the ones that get you. I want to be honest about myself, since I'm the one telling this. I could have let it go. Holly's had money he needed. It was coming from somewhere, and the decent thing, maybe the kind thing, would have been to say nothing, mind my own fences, and let an old man have his miracle. Miracles are for the people who need them, and I've never been a man who needed one, and there's a kind of arrogance in taking a poor man's miracle apart to see how it works. But I couldn't. I've thought a lot about why. Part of it's the ledger in me, the part that can't stand a number that won't reconcile. Part of it, and this is the part I'm less proud of, part of it was that I was lonely too. My wife, Corrine, left me 9 years back, not dead, just gone, took the truck and the good dog and went to her sister's in Boise and never came home, and I don't blame her. I was a hard man to live with and I've had a lot of quiet years to know it. So when I say I couldn't leave Holly's mystery alone, some of that was that it was the most alive thing to happen in that valley in a long time, and I wanted to be near it. I wanted to be in a story. Men my age don't get many. So over the next 3 weeks I found reasons to come by. I brought over a proper fence post and set it and pretended it was for my heifers. I brought a pot of stew, Kareen's recipe, which was a lie. Kareen never made stew in her life. I got it off a can label, but Holly's ate 2 bowls and I watched the color come back into his face a little and counted that a win. And every few days, Rye ran into the forest before dawn, and every few days he came back muddy and burr-caught and panting, and there was money. Not always much, sometimes just a few dollars. Once nothing but a single folded bill, a 5 so soft with handling it was near cloth, but it kept coming, and I started keeping a record. Of course I did. I wrote down the dates, the amounts, the condition of the bills, and I started to see a shape in it the way you do when you keep numbers long enough. The money came heavier at the start of the month and thinned toward the end. Somebody was living on a schedule. Somebody who got a little money at the first, a check, a payment, something, and doled it out and ran low by the 30th. That's not somebody rich playing angel. That's somebody poor. That's somebody sending Holly's money they did not have to spare. That changed things for me. I'll tell you exactly when it changed. It was a Tuesday, near the end of the month, and Rye came back with $2 and a button. A button, Wade, an ordinary shirt button, tangled up in his collar fur like it had fallen off somebody's hand while they were tucking the money in. I sat in Holly's cold kitchen and I turned that button over and over and I thought, whoever this is, they're down to their last dollars and they're still giving them to you, and the giving is costing them something real. And a thing that costs the giver, that's not charity. Holly's was right. That's love or guilt or both, which in my experience are so close together most people can't tell which one's got hold of them. I didn't tell Holly's about the pattern. I don't fully know why. Maybe because I was afraid that if he knew somebody poor was bleeding themselves for him, his pride would make him refuse it, and then he really would lose the place. Maybe because I'd started to think of the mystery as mine. I'm not proud of that either. I'm just telling you how it was. Now here's where I have to tell you about the dog. Because the dog is the whole thing and I've been treating him like a delivery truck, and that's not fair to him. Rye wasn't Holly's dog originally. He was Marin's. She'd found him as a half-starved pup by the county road the last good spring she had before she got sick, and she'd fed him up and named him Rye after the whiskey her own father drank. And that dog loved her the way dogs love the one person who saved them, which is a love with no bottom to it. When Marin got sick, Rye slept under her bed. When she was dying, in the hospital bed they set up in the front room so she could see the ridge, Rye lay against the side of it and would not be moved, not for food, not for anything. And Holly's told me once, just once, and he never spoke of it again, that the dog knew before the nurse did. That Rye lifted his head and made a sound Holly's had never heard, a long, low sound, maybe 2 minutes before Marin stopped breathing, like he was calling her back, or letting her go. Holly's didn't know which. And after she was gone, Rye kept looking for her. That's a thing dogs do that'll break you if you watch it. He'd go to the door when a car came, checking. He'd sniff her apron on its hook. He'd sit at the tree line at dusk and stare up into the woods like he was waiting for something to come down out of them. I didn't think anything of that at the time. The tree line, the starring. I think about it now, and I have to put the pen down for a minute. The weather broke hard in the 3rd week. We got a storm off the mountain, sleet turning to snow, the kind that pins everything down and makes the whole valley hold its breath. And Rye went out in it. Before light, same as always, but this time he didn't come back by breakfast. Didn't come back by noon. Holly's called and I could hear it under his voice, the thing a man his age can't hide, that he'd already lost everything once and could not do it again, could not lose one more thing that had a heartbeat. He's out in it, Wade. He's been gone 6 hours in this. He's a smart dog, he knows his way. He's 10 years old and he's got no fat on him and it's 9 degrees. A pause, the line crackled. I have to go up there. Holly's, no, you can't, you'll die up there, you can't see your hand in front of you. I was already pulling my boots on. I'm coming over, do not go into those woods. Do you hear me? Do not. He heard me. He didn't listen. Of course he didn't. Because the thing about Holly's vein, the trait in him that ran under everything, the endurance, it wasn't the good kind, the kind you put on a poster. It was mule stubborn, and it was half made of grief, and it did not care whether it killed him. By the time I got there, his truck was in the yard with the door open and the dome light on, and his tracks were already going up into the tree line, filling in with snow, and I stood in that white roar with my heart going sideways, and I did the only thing I could do. I went in after him. I found Holly's maybe half a mile up, down on the ground again, but this time he wasn't laughing. He'd gone off the old logging trace, the one that led up toward the ridge, and he'd caught his foot in a blown-down snarl of branches and gone down hard on the ice under the snow, and I think he'd been down a while, because the snow had started to cover him, and when I got to him, his lips were the wrong color and he wasn't making much sense. He kept saying Rye's name. And he kept saying another name, over and over, one I'd never heard him say, and I filed it away without understanding it, the way I file everything. He kept saying, Junie. Junie, he said, Junie, I'm coming, and then he'd say the dog's name, and then Junie again. I got him up. I got his arm over my shoulder and I half carried him, and he fought me, this 71-year-old man with no meat on his bones. He fought me to keep going up the mountain, and I had to get right in his face and shout over the wind. There's nothing up there, Hollies. It's a storm, there's nothing up there, we're gonna die, we have to go down. And he looked at me, and for a second his eyes cleared, and he wasn't confused anymore. He was just old and broken and certain. And he said something I have not been able to get out of my head from that day to this. He said, there's somebody up there, Wade. There's been somebody up there the whole time, and I think I know who. Then his legs went out from under him, and I stopped arguing, and I carried him down. We made it. I'll tell you that much now so you're not sick with it. I got him into the truck and got the heat roaring and got him back to my place where the wood stove was hot, and I put every blanket I owned on him and made him drink something warm and yelled at him and cried a little myself when he wasn't looking. He came around by dark, ornery, ungrateful, alive. And around 9 that night, scratching at my door, half frozen, one ear torn and bleeding, snow crusted into his coat like armor, Rye came down out of the storm. He'd found his way to my place. He'd never done that before. He'd never once come to my house. But he came that night, and he stood in my doorway shaking, and he looked up at me, and I swear to you on my grandfather's grave that dog was trying to tell me something. Because tucked under his collar, soaked through, half frozen, was not money this time. It was a note. 4 words in a shaking hand in pencil. The letters gone soft where the snow had got to them, but still readable, just barely, if you held them to the light. I read it. I read it 3 times, and then I sat down on the cold floor of my own kitchen with that torn-eared dog leaning his whole weight against me, and I understood that the thing I'd been treating like a puzzle to solve was a person, up there in the dark, in the storm, alone, and that I was going to have to make a decision I did not want to make. The note said, tell him not to come. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up with the dog and the ledger, and I did not write a single number down. Because for the first time in my life, there was nothing to count. There was only a name I'd heard an old man say into a blizzard, and 4 words in pencil, and $130 that somebody who had nothing had sent down a mountain, 1 dog at a time, so that a man they couldn't face wouldn't lose the last thing they'd ever given him. Junie. I knew by morning that I was going to go up there. I knew I wasn't going to tell Holli's first. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, sitting there in the dark, was that I only had about 4 days left to find her. I went up the mountain on the 4th morning after the storm, and I want to set down exactly how I left things, because the leaving was the hardest part, and I've never told anybody the whole of it. I told Holli's I was going to check my high fence. That was a lie, and it was the second lie I told him, the first being that stew, and I remember thinking, sitting in his kitchen with him watching me over the rim of his coffee, that I'd become a man who lied to a grieving old man twice, and both times I'd told myself it was kindness. That's the thing about kindness. It'll walk you right up to the edge of something ugly and hold your coat while you do it. He knew I was lying. I could see he knew. He didn't have the strength to fight me on it. The storm had taken something out of him that didn't come back, a low fever that wouldn't quit, a rattle in his chest I didn't like the sound of. But he set his cup down and he looked at me and he said, "You're going up there." "I'm checking fence." "Wade, just my name, quiet. If you find," and he stopped and his hand came up and touched the table flat like he was steadying the whole house. "If there's somebody up there, you tell them I said another stop. 51 years of marriage teaches a man a lot of words and unteaches him all the important ones. You tell them the door's open, that's all, whatever it is, whatever they think. The door's open and it always was." I said I would. It was the first true thing I'd told him in a week. Then I took the dog, and I went into the woods. Rye knew the way. Of course he did. He'd been walking it for months, and he set off up the old logging trace at a trot with his torn ear flat against his head, checking back over his shoulder every so often to make sure I was still coming. And I followed a dog into the wilderness the way you follow anything you've decided to trust, with your whole heart and none of your good sense. The snow was still deep in the shadows and gone to mud in the sun, and the going was slow, and I had a lot of time to be afraid. I'll tell you the truth. Part of me hoped I wouldn't find anything. Part of me hoped it really was a stranger, some hermit playing angel, somebody I could thank and pay back and walk away from. Because if it was who Hollis thought it was, if it was the person whose name he'd cried into the storm, then I was walking toward a grief so old and so deep that I had no business touching it, and I knew it, and I kept walking anyway. We came up over a shoulder of the ridge about 2 hours in, and Rye stopped, and I stopped behind him. There was a trailer in the trees. Not a camper, an old single-wide, the kind that gets hauled up a logging road once and never leaves, gone green with moss on the north side, the metal skin dented and rusted through in places. Somebody had banked pine boughs against the base of it for warmth. There was a stovepipe with a thin thread of smoke coming out, which meant somebody in there was alive, or had been that morning. There was a clothesline strung between 2 trees with a single shirt on it, frozen stiff. And there was a path worn in the snow from the trailer door down to a little seep of a spring, worn deep, walked 1,000 times by feet that didn't have anywhere else to go. Rye trotted up to the door and sat down and looked back at me. "Home," he was saying. "This is where the money comes from. This is the person I've been going to." And the door opened. She was younger than I'd braced for. That was the first thing that threw me. When an old man cries a name into a blizzard, you picture somebody old, and she wasn't. She was maybe 50, though sickness had put 20 hard years on top of that, so it was hard to say. She was thin the way Hollis was thin, that same starved sharpness through the face, and I understood in one look that they were the same blood, that there was no question in it, that she had her father's jaw and something around the eyes that must have been her mother's because it sure wasn't his. She looked at me. She looked at the dog, and her whole body went still in a way I've only ever seen in animals that have decided whether to run. "You weren't supposed to come," she said. Her voice was wrecked, wet in the chest, the same rattle I didn't like in Hollis, and I did the arithmetic on that and didn't like the answer. "I got your note," I said. "The dog brought it down in the storm, half froze doing it." Something crossed her face at that. She looked down at Rye and she reached out one hand. The fingers were wrong, swollen at the joints, and there was a shirt button missing off her cuff. And I thought about the button in the collar and I had to look away for a second, and she touched the dog's torn ear, gentle as anything. "He's a good dog," she said. "He's the best dog. He wasn't supposed to bring you, though. He was just supposed to bring the—" She stopped, straightened up, and the pride came into her, the exact same pride. God, it was like watching Hollis stand up in his own yard. "You'd best go back down. There's nothing for you up here." I'm not up here for me, I said. I'm Wade Coffee. I've got the place next to your father's. The word father landed on her like a hand. I don't have a father, she said. But she said it the way you say a thing you've made yourself believe by saying it enough, and it didn't hold, and we both heard it not hold. And she turned around and went back inside the trailer and left the door open, which is the closest thing to an invitation a proud, dying person can manage. I'm not going to tell you everything she told me. Some of it isn't mine to tell, and some of it I've folded up and put somewhere I don't look, but I'll tell you enough. Her name was June Vane, Junie. She was Holly's and Marin's only child, and she had not spoken to her father in 19 years. The falling out, she told it plain, no self-pity, which somehow made it worse. The falling out was the oldest story there is. She'd got mixed up, young, with the wrong things and the wrong people, the kind of trouble that comes in a bottle first and worse things after, and she'd done damage. She'd taken money that wasn't hers to take from her own mother's hand, more than once. She'd said things across that kitchen table down the mountain that a person can't unsay. And the last time, she was maybe 30. The last time, Holly's had told her not to come back until she was clean and could look her mother in the eye. And she'd told him she'd never come back at all. And she'd meant it more than he had. And she'd kept it, which was the one promise in her whole life she ever managed to keep. She got clean eventually. Years later. Too late to matter, she figured. Built a small life somewhere down in the flatlands, nothing much, worked at a cannery until her lungs went bad, and then the sickness came, the kind with a short road and no exits, and when the doctors told her how much of that road was left, she did the thing that people do. She came home, not to be seen, just to be near. I heard Mama died, she said. She was sitting on a milk crate by the little wood stove, and she wouldn't look at me while she said it. I heard it from a woman I used to know, 14 months back, and I couldn't. Her hands worked in her lap. I couldn't go to the funeral. What was I going to do? Walk in, after 19 years, walk up to that box and no, I lost the right to that a long time ago, but I couldn't stay away neither, so I came up here. My granddad's old hunting trailer. Nobody knew it was still standing, and I've been up here since, watching the smoke come out of his chimney down there of an evening, just so I'd know he was still. She stopped. It's a sick thing to do, watching your own father through the trees like a ghost. I know it is, but I couldn't leave and I couldn't go down, so I did the sick thing in the middle. And then, one day in the fall, half starved and half out of her mind with fever, she'd heard something at the door, and it was a dog. A rangy shepherd mixed the color of a wet paper bag, come up out of the woods on his own, and he'd looked at her and she'd looked at him, and she'd known him. She'd have known him anywhere, because she'd seen him from a distance down at the house, lying in the yard. She knew whose dog he was. He came to me, she said. And her voice finally broke, right there, the first crack in her the whole time. Out of everybody in the world, that dog walked up a mountain and found the one person up here, and it was me, and I thought maybe Mama sent him. I don't believe in things like that. I never did. But I thought it anyway because there wasn't anything else to think. She fed him what little she had. He came back the next day and the next. And one day, half as a joke and half as a prayer, dying and broke and unable to say a single one of the things she needed to say, she'd taken the last of the old money, a roll of bills she'd kept hidden for 30 years. Drug money, she said, flat and ashamed. The last of the money she'd stolen and never spent, been too sick with guilt to ever spend. She'd taken that dirty old money and some of her disability check besides. And she'd folded it up and tucked it under the dog's collar and pointed him down the hill and said, "Go home. Take it to him. Tell him I'm sorry. You tell him, because I can't." It was the only way I had to touch him, she said. The dog, the money. It was the only way I had left to put something in my daddy's hand. She looked at me finally, and her eyes were dry now, all cried out, empty and steady. "And you went and followed the dog, damn you. You went and followed the dog. Here's the decision I told you about. Here's the one I didn't want to make." She made me promise not to bring him. She made me promise it twice, gripping my wrist with those swollen, wrong-jointed hands, harder than a dying woman should have been able to grip. Don't you tell him where I am. Don't you bring him up here. Let him have the money and let him think it's a mystery and let me go without. I can't have him see me like this. I can't have the last thing he ever knows about me be this. Promise me, Coffee, promise me." And I promised. And I went back down the mountain. And I sat in Holly's Vane's kitchen with his dead wife's glasses folded on the windowsill and his fever making him bright-eyed and strange. And I looked at that old man who'd cried a name into a blizzard, and I broke my promise. I told him everything. I've thought about that more than anything I've ever done, whether I had the right. She'd asked me, begged me, and it was her death and her shame and her choice. And who was I, the fence-line neighbor, the man who couldn't keep his own wife, to override a dying woman's last wish? I don't know that I had the right. I've made my peace with not knowing. What I knew, sitting in that kitchen, was that I had two people on the same mountain, blood of the same blood, each one starving to say a thing to the other, each one too proud and too broken and too sure they'd lost the right, and both of them running out of time, one on the ridge and one in that chair, and I could hear it in both their chests, that same wet rattle, and I thought, no, not like this. Not two of them dying half a mile apart, too stubborn to close the distance. Somebody had to be the one who wouldn't allow it, and there wasn't anybody up that valley but me. So I told him. And Holly's Vane, 71 years old, sick with fever, one bad winter from losing his father's land, put both his hands flat on the table, and he bowed his head down over them, and he made a sound I'd heard exactly once before. It was the sound the dog made, the long, low one, the one Rye made 2 minutes before Marin stopped breathing, the calling back sound, the letting go sound. Holly's made it into his own hands at his own kitchen table, and I understood that he'd been carrying it in his chest for 19 years and it had finally found the crack to get out through. Then he stood up and he got his coat, his real coat this time, and he said, "Take me to my daughter." We went up in the last light, the two of us and the dog, slow, Holly stopping every 100 yards to fight for breath, refusing to turn back, refusing to rest, that terrible endurance in him now aimed for once at something worth reaching. I kept a hand under his arm the whole way. Rye ranged ahead and circled back, ahead and back, herding us, keeping us together, the way he'd kept Marin's deathbed, the way he'd kept everybody he ever loved. The smoke was still coming out of the stovepipe when we came over the shoulder of the ridge. I want you to know that. The smoke was still coming. Holly stopped at the tree line and looked at the trailer for a long moment, and I saw him gather himself, this old man, gather up 19 years, and then he let go of my arm and he walked the rest of the way on his own. He wouldn't be carried to it. That much he had to do standing up. I stayed back by the trees. Some things a man's got no business watching, and this was one, and besides, I had to look at something and it might as well be my boots. I heard the trailer door open. I heard Holly say her name, Junie, the way he'd said it in the storm, except this time there was somebody there to hear it. And I heard her make a sound, the same sound, God help them. The whole bloodline seemed to grieve in the same key. And then I heard nothing but two people crying, up on a cold mountain in the last of the light, with a dog sitting between them looking up at first one face, and then the other, till going slow against the snow, like he'd finally, after all these months of running up and down that hill, delivered the one thing he'd been carrying the whole time. I gave them the evening. I built up their fire and I made them what food there was, and then I went and sat outside on a stump in the dark so they could have the trailer to themselves, and I could hear them talking in there, low, hour after hour, 19 years of it, and every so often somebody would laugh, and every so often the laughing would go the other way, and Rye lay across my boots and kept me warm, and I kept my own ledger closed, because there are some accounts that don't reconcile and were never meant to. Junie lived 11 more days. She came down the mountain in my truck the next morning, wrapped in every blanket Holly's owned, and she died in the front room of her father's house, in the same room her mother died in, looking at the same ridge, with Holly's holding one of her ruined hands and me useless in the doorway, and the dog pressed against the side of the bed, and refusing to move, exactly the way he had the last time, because he'd done this before and he knew how. And about 2 minutes before the end, he lifted his head and he made that sound, that long, low sound, and Junie's breathing eased right after, the way you ease when somebody finally comes to walk you the rest of the way. I don't know what that dog knew. I've quit trying to figure it. There are numbers that don't add up, and I've decided some of them aren't supposed to. Holly's kept the money. All of it. He never spent a dime of the roll she'd sent down, the dirty old money, the money she'd stolen and never could use, the money she'd finally found a way to put in her father's hand. He keeps it in one of Marin's canning jars on the windowsill next to her reading glasses, and I've seen him stand there and look at it, and I've never once asked him what he sees. He's better now. Slower, and the winter was hard on him, but he made it through, and this spring he fixed his own fences, every post, and painted the north side of the house the color Marin always wanted it, and when I came by to help he told me to go home, he had it. So I did. A man's fences are his own business. I've always said that. The dog's mine now. Holly's gave him to me, said Rye had a job to do up here once and it's done, and a working dog needs new work or he'll grieve, and I've got the acres for him to run. So Rye runs my land now, and every so often still, he'll take off toward the tree line and be gone half a day, and every time he does it my heart goes sideways and I catch myself checking his collar when he comes back. There's never anything in it. There's no one up there anymore. I know that. I walked it in the spring, and the trailer's empty and the clotheslines down, and the little worn path to the spring is grown over already, like the mountains forgetting there was ever anybody on it at all. But he still runs up there, that dog, he still goes, and I still check the collar. I don't know what I think I'll find.